Welcome back. How you doing? I hope you're doing very well. Last time we talked, we were discussing George Washington's end of his presidency and the farewell address that he was giving. Remember, the farewell address was his goodbye speech where he was telling the nation why he wouldn't be president anymore and giving his advice to how they could be successful in the future. So, George Washington's term is over. What's the next step for America? Do they run around the streets and panic? No. They have another election. Well, how do we do that here? Well, you'll see posters and you'll see advertisements on TV and on your phone and on the internet, and you'll get letters and you'll get phone calls all wanting you to vote for a certain person. This is called campaigning. All right, and candidates that want to be president will travel all across the country. They'll have meetings and they'll meet people and they'll have speeches, and they'll tell you all the things that they're going to do when they get to become president. Now we're actually coming up to an election soon, so all this campaigning is now starting. We're starting to see a lot of that now, and as we get closer and closer to our next election, you're going to see more and more of these posters and advertisements about wanting you to vote for that person. Now, back in the time that we're talking about, campaigning wasn't as big. It is huge now. It goes on forever. But back then, campaigning itself wasn't that big. The election was, but the actual campaigning wasn't so, they didn't spend so much time on the campaigning. All right, so today we're going to talk about the second election of America and who was in it and what happened with it. So, when we talk about it, we're going to talk about the election of 1796. That's when the next election happened in 1796. And we had two candidates. We had Thomas Jefferson and we had John Adams. Now, Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State for George Washington. Remember, his job was to make sure that America got along with the other countries. It was a very important job. He also helped write the Declaration of Independence. Now, I wrote D of I because I ran out of space, but D of I means the Declaration of Independence. That was when we told England, hey, we don't want to be a part of you anymore. We want our independence. We want to be our own nation. Thomas Jefferson was one of the main writers of that document. He also was an inventor and he was a lawyer. John Adams had been the vice president for George Washington. He also worked on the Constitutional Congress. That was the group of people that wrote our Constitution, another very important document in our country. He was also a lawyer. He studied government and he wrote books. So either one of these men would have done a great job. But I wonder who won. Well, let's think about that. Let's kind of go back a little bit. Remember George Washington when he was being elected and the electoral votes, the electoral college? Did everybody in the Electoral College agree that he should be president? Yes, they did. All of the Electoral College voted for him. That's the only time that has ever happened. It's never happened since then. And to do a quick recap of our Electoral College, let me turn that light off again. There we go. Okay, so remember, we have our states that vote for the people that they want. And then each state has their own electors, and the electors vote depending on whoever their state votes for. And then those electors go and do their votes, and then they vote for whoever the state told them to vote for. And then they count up all those electoral votes, and that's who becomes the president. And that's what happened when George Washington did it. Everybody, all of the electors voted for him. But in this election, that's not quite what happened. So we have Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Now, who do you think won? Exactly. John Adams won. But here's the funny part. He won by only 3 electoral votes. That's it. 3 of them. That was a pretty close election. So now John Adams is our new president. He's the second president of America. Now remember, the people loved George Washington. So change was hard for them because they wanted him to be president again. But he wasn't. John Adams was. So change was a little bit hard for them. But they adjusted and they adapted and they were able to do it. Now here's another kind of trivia question for you if you remember. What was George Washington working on? Planning and building and designing? Remember, it was big planes. The capital. That's right. He was planning Washington, D.C. Did he ever get to live there? No, he didn't. But John Adams did. John Adams was the first president to live in the capital city that Washington was designing. Now, here's another question for you guys. Do you remember who told the people not to have political parties? Who advised the country not to have political parties? Yes, it was George Washington. Do you remember when he said that? He said in his farewell address. That's right. That was his advice to the country to be successful. Now we have a couple vocab words up here. We have Democratic Republicans, Federalists, and John Adams. Now John Adams we already talked about. He became our second president. Now we're going to talk about these two in our political parties. Remember, a political party is a group of people that are trying to gain power in the government. Well, George Washington advised not to have political parties, but the people didn't take his advice, and during John Adams' presidency, they created political parties. They created two of them. They created the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. So let's look and see what their ideas were. So the Federalists, their ideas were, they were, first of all, mostly Northerners, which meant most of the people lived in the North that were in this party. They wanted America to be powerful in banking. That means they wanted to have America to have a lot of businesses. They thought America should make most of their money in businesses. And they also wanted to go to war with France at that time. Now, the Democratic Republicans, they wanted America to be a nation of farmers. They thought farming was more important for America, and they wanted America to concentrate on farmers and have mostly farmers and not have mostly businesses and banking. The Democratic Republicans also did not like wealth that came from banks and trade. They were afraid that too much wealth like that would start causing America to be split into the poor and the rich. And then finally, Democratic Republicans, did not want to go to war with France. All right, so you can see some of the differences in what they each believe. Now, the reason people have political parties is because they have different ideas on different topics. And this is why they formed these political parties, these different groups, because some believe these things and some believed these things. All right, so now John Adams was a part of the Federalist Party, but he decided not to go to war. Now, what did his party want? His party wanted to go to war, but he decided that it was better for the country to not go to war. So they didn't go to war. Do you think his political party was happy with him? He wasn't. They were not. And neither were these ones, because they didn't want to go to war, but they were already upset with him for other things. The Federalists did want to go to war, and he didn't, so they were upset with him. So both of the political parties were upset with him. But John Adams decided he wanted to do what was best for the country, not what he thought that the political party that supported him wanted him to do. He wanted to do what was best for everybody, not just that group. So he didn't do that. Now, at this time, remember, we have our two political parties that were being formed. Well, the newspapers and the newspaper reporters started choosing a political party side. Some of them decided they liked what the Federalists were doing, and some of them decided they liked what the Democratic Republicans were doing. So they would print the truth about what was going on in the government, but they would also print things that were not true. It's a lot like today. You never know what you hear on the internet and what you hear on the news and what you hear and read in the newspapers. You can't just take that as true. Just like today, you have to make sure that it's true. Find out for yourself. You can't always believe what you see on the news or in the newspapers. Same thing back then. He did the same thing then. So John Adams did not like that people were attacking the government and saying bad things and telling lies about the government. So he decided to make a law that says that the reporters in the newspapers were not allowed to talk about the government, and they were not allowed to write anything about the government or the people in it. Now, remember back then, people didn't have telephones. They didn't have TVs. They didn't have the internet. The only way they could get their information was through the newspapers. So if you tell the newspapers that they can't write about the government and the people in it, one, then nobody's going to have any information about what's going on. And two, does that sound like it agrees with our Constitution? Does that sound like we have free speech? Does that sound like we have our Bill of Rights, our freedoms? Mm-mm. No, that was taken away. If you can't have the right to say, write down what your opinion is of what the government is doing and the people in it, then you're taking away your free speech. Well, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison disagreed with John Adams on this one, and they said, that's not right. You're taking away our freedoms. You're taking away our Bill of Rights. You shouldn't be able to do that. Now, do we need to respect our authority? Absolutely, most definitely. They deserve our respect. They're doing a very hard job up there taking care of the country. But do we have the right to say what we think about what they're doing and say whether we like it or not, the people are doing? Yes, we do have that right, but we also need to show respect to our authorities. Now, a lot of people did not like this law. In fact, most people didn't like this law. And he became very unpopular because of this law. And that law didn't last very long. In fact, when he wasn't president, when his presidency was over, they got rid of that law right away. Okay, so we are now. Okay. Right. So John Adams didn't always make the best decisions, but he stood by his decisions. He believed that they were the best for the whole country. Okay? He didn't just pick things that would make him popular. He wanted to choose things that would benefit all of the people, not just his political party or not just him. In fact, that's what we call having character. That's a good character. Now, he didn't just get that overnight. He worked very hard at doing that. He developed it. Remember, he was working for George Washington for 8 years as the vice president. He was part of the Constitutional Congress. So he's been involved in making good choices for America for a very long time. So he's had that ability to develop that good character to make choices. And it's the same thing with us. Do we wake up one morning and say, okay, I am going to have good character and I'm going to make good choices all the time? No, it doesn't work that way. We have to keep doing it every day and reminding ourselves to make good choices every day so that we can build up that good character to do that. And what's one of the ways, there are a couple of ways we can do that. Well, first of all, we can get that help from God. God can give us the guidance on how to make those good choices. Remember the fruits of the Spirit that we sing about in chapel? Following the fruits of the Spirit are good choices to make. Loving others and making sure that we put God first in everything that we do. Those steps will help us to develop that good character to make good choices for everybody, not just for ourselves. Remember we had talked about how John Adams could have made that decision. He could have made it to be popular with his party, but he didn't. Well, have we ever done that? Have we ever made choices just to be popular and not to do what's right? Yeah, sometimes we've done that. But that's how we can work on that good character. By making choices that don't make us popular, but by making choices that are the right thing to do. Even if they might make us unpopular, we're still making the right choice. And that's how we develop that good character. Okay? All right, so now John Adams became very unpopular with most of the people. So when his next election came around in 1800, he didn't get voted in, so he wasn't president again. Remember, George Washington was 2 terms. Do you remember how many years that was? 8 years. That's right, it was 8 years. Well, John Adams only served 1 term as president. So how many years was that? 4 years, right. So he only served for 4 years. Then after 4 years, they had another election of 1800, but he didn't win that one. The next president would be the 3rd president of the United States. We'll talk about that later. So after he was done being president, he went back to his farm. Now, his farm, he has a wife. Her name is Abigail. And she did not have a lot of education the way you did. She didn't go to school, but she taught herself. And she taught herself so well that she actually became one of the most educated women of her time. And she was so educated that she knew how to make wonderful decisions for the farm that she and John Adams had. Now remember, John Adams did a lot of work in politics. He was a vice president. He was a president. He worked in the Constitutional Congress. So he was away from their farm a lot of the time. They didn't have phones. They didn't have FaceTime. They didn't have Skype. They didn't have internet. So they didn't get to see each other or talk. The only way they could talk was by writing letters. Writing words on an actual piece of paper, putting it in an envelope, putting a stamp on it, and putting it in the mailbox and having the mailman deliver it. That was the way that they communicated with each other for so long. Well, while John Adams was out doing his political stuff, she was working on the farm and making decisions for the farm and did an excellent job of making decisions for the farm. In fact, she was so good at her decisions that the farm was very successful. So that when John Adams came back from retiring from being president, he was able to continue working on the farm because she had made such good decisions. So George Washington and John Adams made choices that were best for the country. John Adams could have made choices that would have made him popular, but they wouldn't have been good for the country. He still chose decisions that were best for the country. So our big ideas for today are: John Adams became the second president of the United States. There were two political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And lastly, Adams made decisions based on the good of the whole nation, not just one political group or one party group. He made decisions for everybody, not just for himself. Very good president. So far we've had two really good presidents that have taken care and put a lot of thought into how to run our country. I wonder how the third one's going to do. Let's see when we learn about that one. Okay, so for your assignment today, we're going to have a little bit of fun with your assignment today, okay? Remember we talked about the farewell address that George Washington did. Well, I want you to pretend that you're president and your 4 or 8 terms is up, however long you were president for, that they're finished and it's time for you to give your farewell address as president. I want you to write down in 6 sentences at least or more, what advice would you give to the rest of the country on how they can be successful in the future? Just like George Washington gave his advice, what would your advice be to the rest of the country on how they can be successful? So write down your 6 sentences or more, send it to your teacher, and it will be a participation grade. All right, guys? All right, have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye.